Last, we dig a little into the issue of immigration. On November 11th, I attended a talk about the roots of the immigration crisis. Two experts discussed the history of immigration to this country and looked at where immigration reform stands today. Afterwards, I sat down with one of them, Professor Aviva Chomsky. So before we get into the causes of this purported immigration crisis, I want to just talk about the word crisis. Is that the best word to use?
We heard the word crisis thrown around a lot last summer when we had large numbers of young people from Central America crossing the border. And I think that it's often used in the mainstream media is that somehow it's a crisis for the United States, whereas really it's a crisis. There has to be some kind of a crisis going on that's going to make children leave their homes, flee their homes, and take an extraordinarily dangerous journey to the border and across the border. So I think if we want to locate the crisis, we have to look into Central America for the crisis that's happening there. Another aspect of the crisis, though, is caused explicitly by our immigration law. That is, our laws have created a situation where hundreds of thousands of children are legally separated from their parents and cannot legally reunite with their parents. So that's a crisis too. But I feel like when the term crisis has been used, it's been more to refer to, oh, there's a crisis happening to the United States. All these children are coming. That's a terrible crisis, rather than thinking about who's actually suffering from the crisis.
We hear that people come to the U.S. for a free ride. What would you say to that?
The majority of the children who are crossing the border are not coming to get a free ride in the United States. They're coming because their parents are here. And their parents have been here often for many years or even many decades. And their parents are here working, and their parents are paying taxes, as everybody who works and spends money pays taxes. Generally, they're not taking American jobs that lots of Americans are fighting over. They're taking the jobs that nobody wants and that only somebody who does not have documents and who doesn't have access to the goods that society has to offer is going to be willing to take. They're jobs that have extremely unpleasant and dangerous working conditions, that are very insecure, that have terrible hours, that nobody who has another option is going to take, so they're left for the people who have no other options.
What are the historical and more recent causes to this movement that aren't discussed as publicly?
So I don't want to cover all of American history, although I could lecture you for an hour trying to answer that question. But some of the immediate causes of say, the migration of the last 2 or 3 decades are changes in the U.S. labor market and changes in the countries that migrants are coming from, and changes in the relationships between the United States and the countries that they're coming from. So let me just try to go over each of those really quickly. Changes in the U.S. labor market. We've seen a huge expansion of jobs at the lower end of the labor market. So migrants from Central America have always worked in these lower rungs, whether it's been in agriculture, in mining, in railroad building, jobs that are temporary, that are seasonal, that are unregulated, that are extremely dangerous and onerous. The loss of the manufacturing sector and the turning of our economy into a service economy has created a lot of very low-level service jobs that are frequently unregulated. A lot of immigrants work still in sectors like agriculture, but also in newly expanding sectors like home health care, like elder care, like landscaping, like fast food. The second thing is what's been happening in the countries that the migrants are coming from, primarily Mexico and Central America. And what's been happening there has been neoliberal reforms that have severely undermined social safety networks, and especially the ability of subsistence farmers to live on their land. And those have been imposed through free trade agreements like the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, or the Central America Dominican Republic Free Trade Agreement, CAFTA-DR. So many of the recent migrants are migrants from rural areas who have been turned into refugees by economic policies that make it impossible for them to survive on their land. If you look at Central America in particular, People are coming from 3 countries in Central America. They're not coming from everywhere in Central America. They're coming from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. They're not coming from Nicaragua, Belize, Panama, and Costa Rica. And there's very clear reasons why migrants are coming from those 3 countries. And they have to do with U.S. interventions in those countries that have created extraordinary repression against popular movements for social change in those countries, scorched earth tactics that have driven people off the land, tactics amounting to genocide in Guatemala throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s, and the neoliberal policies that have followed those. It was the wars of the 1980s that sent the first generation of migrants to the United States. Many of those who are migrating now are the children of those who migrated in the 1980s. Many, many immigrants don't want to migrate. They migrate because they have to, not because they want to. Many, many immigrants would much rather stay home if they could stay home. So one of the goals of our domestic, foreign, and immigration policies should be to allow people who want to stay home to stay home. And that means drastically changing our foreign and economic policies towards Mexico and Central America, the places that people are coming from.